Hello everyone, Professor Kurzluck here. So I'm the faculty advisor for the Political Science Club here at UNC. And last week at club meeting, I had a couple of students, and we were talking about worldviews and different views on international politics. And I had a student ask about neoconservatism and the difference between neoconservatism and liberal internationalism. It's a joke in clubs that about who's a neocon versus who's not a neocon, just joking around, but it got me thinking about the differences between these two schools of thought and how much do students know about them and how much time have they spent thinking about neoconservatism versus liberal internationalism. So I figured I would make a video just talking again at the 30,000 foot level about these two different philosophies, these two different worldviews, because they're in the news a lot. Students and viewers of the news are hearing a lot about neoconservative ideas, or did the neocons support this policy or that policy. So these two schools of thought are absolutely worth thinking about. At first glance, they are quite similar. They look quite similar. Their belief structures seem pretty similar. Both support an active American role in politics, both reject isolationism, and both believe that democracy and liberal values matter beyond just U.S. borders. So the importance of democracy in the global community. But once we do look a bit closer, we do see that there are some quite substantial differences. Again, we'll see that there's definitely some similarities, but there are absolutely some differences. So let's think about what these theories really believe and argue. So neoconservatism, again, maybe you hear this one in the news more than liberal internationalism or liberal institutionalism. Neoconservatism is built on the belief that the United States is not just another country in the international system, but a uniquely powerful actor with both the ability and the responsibility to shape global politics. So from this perspective, American power, especially American military power, is not something that should be shied away from or not something to be used overly sparingly. Instead, it is a central tool to maintaining order and promoting political change around the world. So neoconservatives tend to view threats as something that should be confronted early rather than managed over time. In this framework, if waiting happens or a problem isn't dealt with in the immediate term, it allows that threat to grow over time. So this ideology and understanding this helps explain why neoconservative thinkers strongly supported the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The goal was not simply to eliminate weapons of mass destruction, but to fundamentally reshape Iraq's political system and then, by extension, to reshape the broader Middle East. So this approach seems and oftentimes has at the outset a rather optimistic belief about what power can accomplish. If the United States acts decisively and doesn't wait, acts decisively up front, it can remove hostile governments. It can encourage democratic transitions, and it can create a more stable international environment in the long run. So these are discussions and things that we are hearing about right now with Iran. And we've certainly heard the term neoconservative emerge again with the Iranian conflict. So similar to neoconservatism, liberal internationalism supports an active U.S. role in global affairs, but it places much greater emphasis on cooperation, on a roles-based order, on roles themselves, and on institutions. Rather than relying on unilateral power, liberal internationalists argue that international politics can be structured through shared norms and organizations. Institutions matter a lot to liberal internationalists. Institutions like the United Nations or NATO, they're not just symbolic places where heads of state gather to chat. Instead, they are tools that help coordinate action, helps reduce conflict, and provide legitimacy. So, from this perspective, from this belief and these views, how the United States acts is important, maybe just as important as what it does. Military force is, of course, not rolled out, but it is treated as a last resort, ideally used in coordination with allies and within established legal framework, again within those institutions like NATO or the UN. So the emphasis here is on multilateralism, working with other countries to address shared problems that countries face around the world. So this approach was evident in 2001, in the 2011 intervention in Libya, where the United States acted alongside NATO with authorization from the United Nations. So for liberal internationalists, that kind of collective action is not a constraint. It is a source of strength for countries to work together, to come together, agree on an action, and then working together, even if that means utilizing military force. So we can see that there are some fundamental differences, but that doesn't mean that they are that divided. Both neoconservatism and liberal internationalism share a commitment to American leadership in the world. Neither sees the United States as a passive actor. Both believe that global stability, to some extent, depends on U.S. engagement in the international system. And both support the idea that democracy is a desirable political outcome internationally. So I made a video maybe last week about maybe why the international community would want Iran to be a democracy. We can root through the political science literature and see why the international community cares if other states are democracies. This idea of a more peaceful world through democracies. So this overlap between neoconservatism and liberal internationalism helps explain why, at least and seemingly in practice, the two approaches can sometimes lead to similar policies. Again, they both believe in military action, but maybe how you get there or how quickly you get there does vary. So in the 1990s, for example, both philosophies, both camps that subscribed to those philosophies supported U.S. involvement in the Balkans, even if they justified their involvement in slightly different ways. So the real difference emerges when we look at how each approach thinks about power. So we know in political science, in international relations, power matters a lot. So when we think about, this idea of power, one of the most important distinctions is this question of unilateralism versus multilateralism. Neoconservatives are more willing to act alone if necessary. If international institutions or allies are unwilling to support a particular policy, that does not necessarily change the underlying calculation. the priority is effectiveness and decisiveness, and then you can act alone. So liberal internationalists, by contrast, place much greater weight on legitimacy, acting not alone, but instead through alliances, through institutions. This isn't just a procedural step, but instead it shapes how policies are received and whether they succeed in the long run. So from this perspective, unilateral action can actually undermine broader strategic goals by generating resistance or eroding trust between allies. So a second key difference is how each approaches the views of military force. Neoconservatism is much more comfortable with large-scale, proactive interventions, including the possibility of regime change. Many neoconservatives, again, we're painting with broad brushes. We can go in the literature and see different arguments even within these schools of thought, but just a general understanding. Many neoconservatives see military power as a tool that can reshape political systems. Liberal internationalism is more cautious. It tends, and those that advocate for such policies tend to favor limited interventions with clearly defined objectives, oftentimes tied through humanitarian concerns or collective security concerns. Military force is not rolled out, but it is just one tool among many rather than the central instrument of power or of policy. So when we think about these differences, we see that there are quite a few similarities between neoconservatives and liberal internationalists. They see a large role for the U.S. in the world. They see the U.S. taking a leadership role. But when we think about power, we think about force and military force and how quickly military force is used, we start to see that there are some differences, even at the 30,000 foot level, between neoconservatives and liberal institutionalists. Both do believe in a more assertive foreign policy, not an isolationist foreign policy. So some of the debates we're seeing right now and encountering right now about is it the US's role to intervene in Iran or intervene in Ecuador or play a role in solving conflicts that are emerging around the world. So maybe you've heard about or you hear about like isolationists or in the MAGA camp, or how the domestic politics is playing out between the MAGA camp and those isolationists versus the other camp of liberal internationalists and neocons. Because although there's a difference between neoconservatism and liberal internationalists, and they still have a lot of the same shared beliefs. But again, there's differences. So when we think about how we use theories to make sense of the world, we can see that this debate between neoconservatives, isolationists, the MAGA movement, and neocons, this is certainly not a debate that is going away anytime soon. Thank you.